So let's get started. David Cameron, of course, the British Prime Minister, he is due to write a letter to the President of the European Council later today, setting out his demands for reforming the European Union. Now, the Prime Minister has promised the UK, and let's take a look, an in-out referendum, we know that, by the end of 2017. So what will the letter to the bloke there on the right, the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, what will that include? Well, let's take a look. Top of the list of demands is expected to be an opt-out from the ambition by some within the EU to forge an even closer union between member countries. The British government is also likely to do everything it can to negotiate a restriction to benefits for EU migrants living here in Britain. Another of Cameron's renegotiation points will be to see if he can gain greater powers for the British Parliament to block EU legislation. The UK also wants measures to prevent vast migrations from any new EU members across the continent, something strongly opposed, certainly by other members. Let's find out more. Stuart Thompson, public affairs consultant from the legal firm Bircham Dyson Bell, joins us. Stuart, you know I'm going to say it. Thanks very much for coming in at this ungodly hour, but we appreciate it. This is important stuff, right? As I said, the shadow boxing's over. This is the first time David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, is writing this letter, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's not likely to be, a long shopping list. It's really focused on these four pillars, these
key areas.
Four
key areas which enable Cameron and Osborne to go in there and do some negotiation. They're suitably vague, so they can try and do a deal and come back with a package that appeals to business audiences, to other politicians, but particularly to the electorate. And it's very much a political list as well. The 4 points on there really hammer home those points that Osborne and Cameron made in the election very clearly, but have been doing so for several years now. So no huge surprises in that sense.
So those watching at the moment, not in the UK, all around the world, and hello to all of you, they're watching this. If they're very vague, will these four objectives make any difference really to the voter when it comes to this referendum?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head. That's absolutely the point. Will they do enough to reassure those people that are waverers? Yeah. Because the other two groups, the pros and the antis, if you like, they're sort of made up.
They either want to stay or they want to go, right?
Yeah. Yep. So there's very little that Cameron and Osborne can do in terms of coming back with a piece of paper from Europe which says, look, we've done a huge deal. All the Eurosceptics go, wow, fantastic Prime Minister, fantastic Chancellor, you know, you've reassured us. That's not really going to happen. So what we're talking about is the vast majority, or that bit of the electorate in the middle, that they're trying to reassure that Europe is a good place to do business, that don't just impose political solutions or things that favour other countries over and above the UK as well.
So I just said, does this make a difference? Do voters basically care about these four objectives? What about the rest of Europe?
Well, mixed views. I mean, you know, some countries will be very worried what they would see as a sort of more free market, ideologically driven.
Who, for example, roughly? Would you know? I mean, like, which particular countries?
France. I mean, France would be the obvious example. Yep. You know, the French way of doing business and the French, economic model is very different from the British one, still. Right. Now, they have got their own pressures, and indeed Europe itself has been trying to put a much more business-focused emphasis on all the policies it does, sort of anti-regulation, anti-red tape, and looking at the impacts on business. Now, that's very much sort of at the start of that process, but that's something the British have pushed for, and something that Europe is already doing. So it's possible that Cameron could try and tighten up that process, and businesses might be reassured. But is it fundamentally different from what's going on now? Unlikely.
Sure, I do have to wrap it up, but just very briefly. So what happens now? The letter, Donald opens the letter, he reads it, then what? David Cameron goes on a charm offensive, trying to...
Some schmoozing, some detailed negotiations with officials, and then it's the deal. What can they do? And then it's a case of timing of the referendum. Is it, early next year, later next year, 2017? The government has a 2-year window, in effect, to pick the date that it thinks it can win that referendum. And Cameron, of course, don't forget, wants to win.
Yeah, indeed he does. Stuart, always a pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much there.